Hi, I'm Neil Hermes and welcome to episode five of my weekly bird wrap. This week I've got a story about from India about storks. I have a story about how birds can tell family when they're only in the nest as eggs, and I also have a story about Regent Honeyeaters. Hi, I'm Neil Hermes and welcome to episode 5 of my weekly bird wrap. My first story this week is about Regent Honeyeaters. Now, Regent Honeyeaters are a honeyeater that are found in Australia. They were once common along the eastern seaboard, but between about Melbourne and Brisbane, huge area of inland woodland forests, and they occurred in large numbers. Sadly, today they're reduced down to the point where they're now highly endangered. What they really need is colonies of birds to survive, and we have about 3 areas in Australia now where they're regularly seen in groups of birds of more than a few. The trouble is the numbers are just getting down to such low numbers that the birds can't even recognise themselves. The males can't learn the calls, and a breeding program that's occurring in Taronga Park Zoo is actually having to train the male Regent Honeyeaters how to sing their own songs so that when they're released into the wild, they can actually contribute to these small colonies that are left. Now, the study that was released in the last few weeks has discovered that Regent Honeyeaters are really in a dire strait. The next 20 years is critical. If they drop below the numbers that there are now, they may not survive. And the researchers have calculated that we need to release at least 100 birds bred in captivity into the wild every 2 years. So this is a ramping up of the work that we're having to do right now to make sure that they don't drop below that threshold which would see them go extinct in the wild. So we now have essentially a pattern laid out for us. The research has been done. We know what we have to do. There's a lot of work in terms of habitat restoration needs to be done and predator management. Of course, when birds get to these sort of low numbers, random events can be also important. So we have to anticipate that they will occur. But the Regent Honeyeater, 100 birds a year must be bred. 100 birds every 2 years have got to be bred in captivity and successfully released, just to keep us off the extinction pathway for this particular bird. My second story this week is about how birds recognise themselves when they're still only in the nest, and in fact not only in the nest but when they're in an egg. Some amazing research has now been done which is able to work out the heart rate of a chick inside the egg. So using a non-invasive technique, we can tell what the heart rate of the birds is. And so we can tell whether the birds are responding to certain clues and cues. What the researchers have done is they've played the tapes of the adult birds to the eggs. So they've gone into the wild, taken the eggs out under careful conditions, played the calls of the bird, and they can measure the response of the chicks in the egg to their parents' calls. And what they've been able to work out is that the birds learn their parents' calls and become responsive to them. If they play the calls too often, the chick in the egg starts to ignore it because it knows that that's its parent. But what we're learning now is that birds can learn their calls of their parents inside the egg. And this research has been done on little penguins, it's been done on Darwin finches, it's been done on Australian wrens, and it's providing us with interesting insights as to how learning occurs in chicks and potentially in bird chicks and potentially in other animals. My last story today comes from India, and in the US they've just released a film about the great Adjutant, which is a type of stork that is extremely rare, down to about 1,000 birds, lives in India and Indochina. There's a couple of breeding colonies, one in Assam in India and one in Cambodia. And these are huge storks, enormous animals. They have this huge guttural pouch. They're a bit like a vulture because they soar in the air with vultures, and they eat carrion and other foodstuffs that they find with the vultures. So they're an unusual stork in that sense. These birds have become extremely rare, and as I say, in Assam in India, which is that little bit of India that's just north of Bangladesh and south of Bhutan, it's tucked away up in the foothills of the Himalayas, there's a small village, Kamrup, where these birds occurred, and they were always condemned because they tended to feed around the rubbish tips and feed on unsavoury things. But women in that community have now rallied to try and protect these birds, and a wonderful film has just been released on YouTube about this bird. It's only a 28-minute film. It's a fascinating insight to birds and to people and how communities can work to help to save a particular species of bird, and an interesting insight into Indian communities. And you'll find a link to this film on the website, and I'd encourage you to have a look at it. There's a little a teaser piece for about a minute long, and then the full film is about 28 minutes. But it's about this particular stork and this particular group of women, and one woman in particular who's doing a huge amount to try and protect this bird that's been an unpopular bird in the past, but is now, as I say, down to less than around about 1,000 birds left. And it's a real tribute to this community that they've made this bird such a focus of their lives. So I'd applaud you to go and have a look at that video clip. And when you're there, have a look at the other clips on my website. Have a look at the other stories on my website, neilhermes.com.au. And if you want, check out some of the tours I'm doing, check out my books. And look, until next time, happy birding.